I've been in meetings with the executive branch where it sounds like it's hot and sexy,
Right.
but it's not. We ended up just talking about nothing.
I've been in those.
Yeah, hot and sexy meetings at the executive branch.
Not, to be clear, not hot and sexy meetings. I've been at meetings at the executive branch that look on paper to be a big deal and aren't really the big deal.
Southern Baptist Conference, hot and sexy meetings at the executive branch. You heard it here.
Especially with the traditional values folks, I can promise they were not hot and sexy. This is Crossing Phase, the podcast featuring a Christian and a Muslim talking religion and politics. Your co-hosts for this adventure are me, Matt Hawkins, a once policy director for the Southern Baptist Convention, and my New York Muslim friend, the multi-talented John Pinna. Show notes, bios, and all our social media links are available at crossingphase.com.
How you doing, sir? What's happening?
Good, how are you?
All right. You have a good weekend? You had a good holiday weekend?
Holiday was good. Had some friends in town. Did some grilling. Went to a football game. It was good times.
So we started Muharram on the 30th. So I think we should, if there's any kind of holidays in the situation, we should probably. So Muharram is the honoring of the Battle of Karbala, the death of the grandson of the Prophet Hussein, peace be upon all of them and their families, right? So and so it's a big Shia holiday,
okay,
and so it commemorates the idea of the Shia faith surviving, this idea of the bloodline surviving as the Umayyads surrounded the Prophet's family and hammered them mercilessly. In a dry riverbed. So
doesn't sound like a joyous holiday.
It's not. I mean, I say Happy Muharram, but I get a lot of heat for that.
Yeah.
So especially with my 12er friends. So yeah. So I
and remind me, 12er. What is that a reference to? What does that mean for we Western evangelicals that aren't familiar?
Okay, so. Are we going to get into like the Shia Sunni lesson?
If it's a deep rabbit trail, we can skip it for now because I know we got other stuff to.
Well, I mean, I could teach you the difference. I could teach you the difference between Sunni and Shia in 3 minutes if that's what you really want. Are you into it, or should we just go?
Yeah, go ahead. Sunni Shia in 3 minutes.
All right, peace be upon him and his family in the entire conversation because we can't say it after everything. So Hazrat Muhammad had a best friend and confidant, this guy by the name of Abu Bakr. And Abu Bakr would take over the prayer times and when Hazrat Muhammad was sick and when he was on caravan or traveling or something. And he was, I mean, I don't know if he was just a best friend, but he was more than that, right? So he was the number one. Then you have Hazrat Ali, a cousin of Muhammad, who marries Fatima, the daughter, right? So you got the cousin, and then you got Abu Bakr at a place called Ghulam Kal, which is like an oasis. Hazrat Muhammad says, after I pass, Ali will be the next in line in the bloodline to the end of days. Mm-hmm. There's some question of whether or not who was there, what happened at Ghulam Kal. So I'm not going to make a judgment on that. But Hazrat Muhammad passes. Those that follow Abu Bakr become Sunni. Those that follow Ali, the bloodline, become Shia. That's essentially the difference. Do you follow the best friend or do you follow the bloodline,
sure.
Right?
Yeah.
And from Abu Bakr, you get 4 schools of jurisprudence. And from Ali, you really get 4 schools or 4 bloodlines. So when I say 12er, 12ers are the largest Shia group, and they follow to the 12th descendant of Hazrat Muhammad. So like me, I'm Ismaili, so I'm like a 6er, right? So there was some dispute over whether or not the oldest or youngest son or descendant at that time was supposed to take over. Those that follow the older are my guys. Those that follow the younger go all the way out to 12.
Oh, okay.
So that's what 12ers. So
Okay.
so Iranians are 12ers. The two biggest sort of groups, and so Shia follow particularly 12ers, right? They follow what's called ayatollahs, right? So that's their sort of high priests, right? So
Yeah.
so Sistani is the largest group of Shia 12ers outside of Iran, and he's in Iraq. And it was this other guy Al-Huli who was an Ayatollah who they merged when the Ayatollah Al-Huli passed. And then you have a guy named Shirazi. It's a little bit more restrictive. He's in Iran. So, and then there's Shia, most all over the place. Shia 12ers all over the place. So, and then my sect, the Ismaili, is a really small sect. Of Islam, but we had one of the caliphates. We were the Fatimid Empire, stretched all through North Africa, all the way up to Turkey, Asia Minor, and they built Cairo. So, and Ismailism was founded in Tunisia, so in a place called Media. So, anyways, so this holiday is very sacred to Shia. Some celebrate the first 3 days, some celebrate 10 days, some celebrate 12, or some go all the way out to 60. And it's a morning holiday, not early in the day, but
Mourn.
So a shout out to all my Shia and Sunni brothers and sisters who are mourning the Muharram and the first few days of Muharram.
That was helpful.
So
helpful and succinct explanation.
Yeah, it doesn't happen with me, does it? I could see you were like, this is going to be a short one. So I'll probably
did it in under about 3 minutes. That's good. I'm impressed.
That's generally the difference. And Muharram, the one part about Muharram is the split with the battle. The Umayyads represent a non-linear, bloodline linear group. So it's a point of contention between Sunni and Shia sometimes when they talk about the battle.
Sure.
So here's the thing. So I'm going to slam you a little bit.
And we don't want to get into anything contentious on this show, right, John?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to. I'm not going to say that there's any kind of issue there. I just say because I think, to be honest with you, I think it's all semantics. I think I used to make fun of my friends with Abu Bakr and particularly some of my fundamentalist friends, and I was like, so how was your Fajr Bakr? So Fajr is morning prayers. So I just add Bakr onto anything. So how was your Fajr Bakr? And they'd be like, what are you talking about? Because we Shia have sainthood. We have a lot of saints and heroes, and Sunnis don't really do that. So but I always kind of poke fun that they follow the best friend. So but yeah, so there's a little bit back and forth on that. So here's the question to you.
Okay. I'm bracing for it.
You and I have been swimming in these waters in Washington for a long time. We have a lot of contacts. We interact with all these different factions.
Right.
We now have a TV show celebrating the Christian conspircy. Thank God they stayed.
Is it really?
So thank God they stayed the hell away from us. This one, So, but maybe every show is about us. I was, I was watching that Tom Clancy. I can't remember what the TV show is called. Jack Ryan.
Yeah.
And like the first, I'm glad they pivoted to Russia because the first one was pretty terrible. It was about all these people getting killed in churches.
Yeah.
I was like, what are we doing here? The second episode, some priest gets stabbed in the chest.
Yeah, it's intense.
Yeah, I go, this isn't good. This isn't going to bode well. So here's the deal. So you and I know about all the different factions that are here, more or less. Right? So we know that the Knights Templar meet here in their full garb with the red crosses and the chainmail in the basilica.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was called into a meeting once and I said, I'm not going to be part of your weird sacrifice. So that's not going to happen. So, and there's all these other groups that are here that are meeting, right? And there's one that's called the Fellowship.
Yeah.
Right. And I interact with those guys. You've interacted with those guys and who have this place called the Cedars, this clubhouse. And Now there's a TV show called The Family. So I would like to know, how many times have you been absolved for adultery? And number one. And number two, like, you got to let me know what's going on with the rituals. What happened with, where are they really following? Is the Jesus cult now a business bent on rituals? And the TV show is called The Family on Netflix.
Yeah. So for those who might not know what we're talking about, Netflix has a limited series.
Was that a good? Was that a good?
That's
lead
a good.
in?
That's a good lead.
Did I play you in well? All right, because I just wanted to make sure that I said enough, to make it, because now everybody's thinking,
what are they talking about?
Society?
So Netflix recently released a short series. That's 5 episodes, titled "The Family," which is documents based on a couple books by journalist Jeff Charlotte, his experience in supposedly uncovering, quote unquote, the family, or it also goes by the name The Fellowship, which ostensibly is a non-official, official, funded, but non-existent group.
You're a powerful group in Washington. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, that claims to basically raise up Christian leaders or Christians into leadership positions, both domestically and around the globe. And so this Netflix series seeks to expose that as some kind of investigative journalism with a hint of conspiracy theory. Anyway, it's all the rage in the circles that really are freaked out by the Evangelical Association, particularly with the Trump administration in power. Is that fair to say?
I think so. I mean, I got slammed. Everybody goes, "Are these the guys that you talk to all the time? Is this happening?" And I go, "Yeah, no, these are the guys." I mean, but my counterpunch is this, and is that generally anybody within the Beltway has a faction and funding and an agenda.
Right.
So I'm not even sure you can. And so this whole town is full of weird conspiracies. Right. So, but I would think it would be a conspiracy in Tennessee, but not in the Beltway. You just have like a bunch of people that have similar interests, who might be enemies, might be friends, who might have weird rituals, and they all have an agenda. And if their guy comes to power or their guy gets near power, they're going to back that horse, and they're all trying to grab power. So yeah. I don't think there's any difference between Walmart does the same thing.
Right.
I'm not bashing Walmart. I'm just saying.
It reminds me a little bit of the fictionalized movie several years ago about the lobbyist. It was called "Thank You for Smoking."
I mean, it sounds familiar, but I don't know.
It basically chronicles the life of the experience of a tobacco lobbyist. And right.
Well, I mean, I used to work for the first 10 years of my career was the home building industry. First 10 years.
Yeah.
And I mean, the amount I sat here in a meeting way back in 2003. And it's called the Big Builder Conference. The top presidents from the top 100 builders come into Washington D.C. And they discuss every year what they're going to do with the home building industry. And I was low-level staff. I mean, I was just taking notes. And Alan Greenspan was there, and the top home builders were there, and they discussed the subprime mortgage scheme.
Mm-hmm.
And there were home builders there that said, "No, we're not going to do this." They were like, "We're the home builders. We have our own mortgage companies. We can buy into the points." Alan Greenspan was sitting there going, "I'll keep the interest rates low." And there were home builders there was a guy from American Homes. God, I can't remember his name. And he protested. He was one of the old guard, and said, "We're going to destroy the industry." I mean, the largest industry in the country at that time, $988 billion industry, was the home building industry. And he said, "No way, we're not going to do this." And it was this huge dispute, but in the end, they decided to go with it. And of course, 7 years later, it destroyed the global economy and the only economy of the product that has to be built in our country, homes. So, I mean, I can speak volumes about my experience in the home building industry and the craziness that happened there, but that's not unique There are numerous meetings that happen with different agency officials and with different factions and groups who are trying to push their agenda forward or making secret agreements to do things. And this wasn't anything that was sinister. It was the industry deciding, the top 100 builders saying, this is where we're going to go for the next couple of years, and we're going to see where it takes us.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's unique, but I do think because of the lens with the president and we got to know how deep you are in the Cedars now. Right. This is a question that everybody's going to be asking, I think. That was a question I was like, maybe Matthews, why are you on the run? Why are you in Tennessee? And why are you outside of the Beltway now? What happened between you and the fellowship? Let's just start with that.
For the record, I've not ever been to the Cedars, nor have I been invited. So I can, I think, while I know some of these quote-unquote associates of the fellowship, as Netflix described them.
Well, what is the Cedars now? It's I call it the clubhouse, but maybe be a little more descriptive of what it is.
So the Cedars is a palatial mansion in Northern Virginia, where supposedly this is the hub of the fellowship, and wherein they also recruit young Christian men, and apparently there's an equivalent ladies' dormitory down the road to cultivate supposedly young men and women for future leadership roles, and they basically hang out and play football and sweep leaves and do chores and all kinds of other stuff that I guess helps build camaraderie, and in and of itself is not anything we ought to be concerned about. But like you said, so I view this, my reactions to the Netflix series drop into two buckets. Number one, first is the citizen bucket. So like you described, anybody who's in Washington, the point is to influence the government to do something, right?
Or for other factions, or build alliances.
It's the whole point. It's freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, right? Freedom of to petition a redress of grievances, right? So
I agree with that.
It's the like anybody who's in Washington is engaging in basically the same thing that the fellowship is dealing with. So, not the least of which, now varying degrees of public activity versus more subtle activity like the fellowship is doing, even appearing to be secretive in places. But the whole point of advocacy in government and leadership is everybody does it. So it's what the IRF Roundtable does, that we've long participated in, is seeking to influence, right, and network. It's a gathering of a non-group, right, and also seeking to replicate itself in other countries as a model of multi-faith collaboration for religious freedom, right? So, the basic model of the activities that the fellowship is engaged in, generally speaking, for American politics, is not all that shocking.
Well, but generally, this is how it works. There's a group or a faction, or there's a group usually associated with an agenda, and they have formal and informal people that work for them. Sometimes they'll hire either a lobbying firm or individual consultants, that are hired guns to go in and advocate on their behalf. And that creates some kind of neutrality for them to stay at arm's length away. And they may not understand governmental process. So there's a lot of non-groups out there that are functioning and operating to influence government. And then they'll have some formal factions or group of factions or coalitions that address that are trying to push an agenda. And so, I guess, when you look at the fellowship and you look at the television, you're like, you and I are kind of like, this is kind of normal.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything any different that happens in London or any place else,
right,
that has got a seat of government. But it's sexy because there's some ritualistic stuff, and it gets into the morality of Christianity and where these guys fall in the spectrum of Christianity and religion, and that's where it's hot. That's where it's sexy.
Right. Exactly, and that's the second bucket of reactions I have. Is one was that as a citizen, as one who's experienced in the world of advocacy, and then the other one is, as you mentioned, as one who is in the broad spectrum of Christianity, and this fellowship purports to be a Christian gathering. And there are certainly marks of that, and they frequently kind of expand their reach by encouraging Bible study, or prayer groups or breakfast prayer groups that are kind of a spin-off, kind of a smaller versions of the National Prayer Breakfast, which features prominently here in the Netflix series and in the fellowship operations. But I see kind of a spectrum,
which you and I both attend the National Prayer Breakfast.
You have been. I actually have not even been to the National Prayer Breakfast. Shockingly enough, no.
Huh. So and so I don't. The National Prayer Breakfast generally is a Christian fest, although there are side events with different factions. You'll have a Middle East and Asia and stuff. Side events that are, and when they say side events, in the hotel that it's housed has all these factions meeting while the event is going on over the series of days. My criticism is that there's never any multi-faith speeches. It's all, I mean, the last one I went to was all about, it was like an echo chamber of like Christian persecution. And we all know where I feel on that. But it is run by. This year, though, I'm pushing that there's multi-faith speakers. Yeah. And we'll see how far I get along with that one.
Right. Well, because one of the guys, members of Congress participate, right? And it's a big event in DC, and there are state level versions of them. And like any other gathering, right? People of influence, like any other gathering with people of influence, other people interested in influencing try to creep their way in, and of course Netflix or the Netflix documentary through Jeff Charlotte's journalism discovered that at least a couple Russian folks had breached the National Prayer Breakfast in recent years, and so of course with the lure of the Trump administration and the drama circulating that and their association with Russians, that was a big drama point in the family on Netflix.
Yeah, I mean they do accept a lot of international and multi-faith people into the breakfast. Yeah. And the lunch, they do accept a lot, and it's very they are very thoughtful along those lines. Like I come in cultural clothes, and there were people with multiple languages coming up to me and saying this, and of course I was able to do a little bit of ghetto dari with them and this and that. And that was nice. But they do have a very strong sort of program and hold over the narrative of, and it's their event essentially. Right. So, I mean, but when you're saying national, it goes back to the conversations we have about multi-faith. It's like everyone's trying to move their agenda. People have a staple event or have access, then they start to chip away at the multi-faith component and push their agenda. Yeah. You and I have talked about persecution and how persecution is a global issue, not just one faith, and how the playing of the numbers with Christian persecution, say Christians are the most persecuted, even though it's not true. So I think the challenge is that there's my struggle is with the fellowship. One of the guys in charge, I've been working with him for 10 years, and every time he sees me, he says, "Who are you again?" I'll just be honest with you. Like
they're not. But another indication they're not very good at networking.
Yeah, so I mean, I've no joke done so many things for this guy under the auspices of multi-faith, and he was all the way up to about a month ago. He didn't recognize me, and not only that. When he was in a meeting, and one of my very close colleagues and friends, a Knights Templar, was who knew they still existed, right? So and was talking to him, and he goes, he said he didn't know you, and I go, that I was like, son of a, how can he not know me after 10 years of working with him? So, do we have to edit that out?
No, we're good.
All right. So, but yeah, and it bothers that's the thing that bothers me the most. Like, oh, I've been working with this guy for 10 years and he still plays this game like he doesn't know what's going on. But
Yeah.
that's a tactic also because they have this gem of an event that everybody wants in on. Even though it's skewed to a specific narrative, and even though it is, they have very strict control over what's said and who attends and how they attend. But it's a huge fundraiser for them too. And I mean, my hope is that out of this, they decide to have multi-faith speakers and have a few people get up there. And maybe this guy will turn around and he'll say, you want to know what, John? We've been working for 10 years and you want to know I've been playing games with you for 10 years. I really do know you. I'd like for him to say that to me,
Right.
So, but anyways, so what's your take on it?
Well, so
Are they a Christian faction? Let's start with right there. And how long have you been involved with them? And why are you on the run from them? Are they after
That's
you?
right. Yeah, that's what scared me out of DC. Was I was on the run from the fellowship. No, the second bucket I look at it is through the lens as a Christian, right, as a fellow Christian, and so some of what the documentary features is pretty.
It's a Christian tradition of cheating on your wife and getting absolved.
Well, we'll get there.
Right?
We'll get there. But we'll get there. But for the tame stuff first, like a lot of what they show in the Netflix is pretty innocuous. Like it's pretty bland.
What are the top three things that you consider innocuous from the television series?
Prayer groups, breakfast prayer groups, like they featured in was it the Portland group that they showed?
Yeah.
So like I see varying degrees of being quote unquote an associate of the fellowship. I thought that was pretty clear in the documentary. Like, so you got the people who are kind of at the hub and are pushing some of the nefarious stuff that we'll get into in a minute, like the Wolf King theory. But it appears that all one needs to do to be considered by Netflix and Jeff Charlotte an associate of the fellowship is to basically participate in some regular weekly Bible study with some folks. So it's plausible to me that like the Portland group that they feature are doing real, what we might describe as real Christian, men's Bible study group, in a way that has nothing to do with this, the more weird stuff that we'll get into. That's kind of at the core of the fellowship. So I kind of see a spectrum there. And the cultivation of young men who are interested in growing into leadership positions, like more or less, that's not a big deal.
That's normal. Men and women get trained all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, there's fellowships, and all different factions that are meant to cultivate people to expose them to leadership and stuff like that. So that's normal stuff. I mean,
that's normal stuff. And by the way, they're doing it without drugs and alcohol and trying to keep them from promiscuous sexual activity. So like to the extent that that's part of the story, like no big deal. What I find to be a big deal as a Christian are two or three different dynamics. Number one is they kind of hand delivered to particularly the young men and apparently through members of their circles a book that's just titled Jesus. And in that book is this basically the four Gospels and the book of Acts, which on the one hand, in and of itself, somewhat innocuous. But the problem there is if that's their only focus, right? They're cutting out the entire Old Testament and they're cutting out all of the epistles and the rest of the New Testament. And that's problematic because we as Christians believe that the whole Bible, the whole Word of God, the whole canon is important to understanding even Jesus. So they have this emphasis on just Jesus, which on the one hand looks pretty tame, but as one who believes in the local church that Jesus, his design for Christians to live in the world is embodied in the local church, I have problems with them propagating as the focus of study a very limited portion of the biblical canon. And look, Christians and evangelicals included, we devote time from time to time to study books that are outside of Scripture, right? And we recognize that
the Apocrypha.
Well, we don't study the Apocrypha. That's a Catholic thing. But and again, I'm giving a lot of credit here presuming the depiction through the Netflix and through Jeff Charlotte's journalism, presuming he's reporting accurately, right? And that it's accurately shown. But what I picked up through that is if the fellowship is promoting the just Jesus thing, what I really notice is that there's really no teaching about the church. So they have an emphasis on the person of Jesus and are taking it upon themselves to be his ambassadors, so to speak, in the world through varying government positions. But I don't see any indication they're submitting themselves to the authority of a local church. Now, individual members may, but that's what it looks like to me, is it's like this external parachurch organization that isn't really giving much credence or thought or interaction with the local church. And that as a Christian is problematic to me because, again, the local church is supposed to be kind of our rooting, kind of the visual temporal expression of Christ's kingdom on earth. And if these guys are skipping past that, then I kind of have a problem with it. And it gets into the problem. It's part of the reason I think they tend to look the other way on the stuff that you were mentioning, which is namely affairs by public servants and their own membership.
Because community linking an entity to the church means it's part of the larger community, which means there's a regulatory sort of component to that, because you're part of an open and I don't want to say ruled, but open and it's all part of the larger Christian community that has rules and regulations, but it's all transparent,
right? And
that's it's that's one of the cruxes with Islam, is that you have a larger community. It's a collective religion, right? Mm-hmm. Collective culture, and within Islamic context, which is Abrahamic. So it's the same deal of this idea of community. So you're saying that it's like an outlier, and then there's, because they're not transparently part of the larger bureaucracy of the church, which some people might be critical of that, even though they might attend church on their own.
And you can certainly err both ways, right? I mean, and Christians disagree on the proper organization of the church, right? So we have Catholics on the one hand, we have independent Baptists on the far end, we have lots of Baptists between here and there, and then we have Presbyterians and Methodists and Anglicans and Episcopal. Like, we all disagree on how the church ought to function in the most flourishing way. But at its best, it does have in all its varying in all the varying instances of it, they do have some form of, or ought to have some form of, authority and accountability. Now, supposedly, the fellowship prayer breakfasts are supposed to facilitate accountability among Christian men. That in and of itself, again, is not an anomaly within evangelical life. It's really normal. But where you see it break down is in these instances where their members have had affairs, and even the man of one, the friend of one member cheats on the other member with his wife, right? And what does the fellowship do? Nothing. And what's the excuse? They don't want anything to threaten their access to power. Their agenda. Right. And I mean, even though we can talk about to the extent that they actually have some power, but they've put power, right, above ethics and above care for people who have been hurt, and that is distinctively unchristian.
So, here's the other side of it. Isn't secretive meetings under the auspices of Jesus, while disregarding the core scripture? Isn't that, I mean, you guys are big on that thing. You guys are big on the scripture, right? You're big on the books,
yes,
right? So as all of us are, but my point is, like, if you're meeting in secret and then you've got some kind of unwritten agenda, and then you're trying to enter the halls of power, to what end? It's only in the hands of a few who are running this secret society. Then essentially, it's not even deviating from Christianity, but you're getting into an ethics and rules sort of thing. Because even though we started this call with everybody does this in DC. Generally, so lobbying is regulated, right? So
It is.
so you have to have your lobbying reports in every week, and monthly, and then they're public documents. Everything that I ever have done in government is there's a document somewhere that says that Johnny P was doing this,
Right.
and it was regulated by not only the authorities but also the agencies or entities, whether it be the Department of Justice or IRS, or it doesn't matter who. If you're taking money to do stuff, the challenge with this one is, and there's a lot of pro bono work that's done for NGOs and stuff like that. But even still, that comes into advocacy, which is what the world you and I are mostly in now, we're in, particularly when you and I were working at the roundtable, and we worked for an organization, even though they were not, like, my organization was the American Islamic Congress. It was not a faith-based organization. It was still an NGO that did international development and multi-faith work, and under the auspices of sort of faith in action, but it was Abrahamic in nature. So there was a transparency there, because you could go to an office,
Right.
you could see how these people are participating, but a lot of times these guys kind of float into these events and these our roundtables and stuff like that. We know they're the fellowship, but they're not. The capacity in which they're there is a gray area. Yeah.
John, why are we doing Crossing Phase?
3 reasons. I wish Molly said everything comes in threes, right? So one is that you and I have a 10-year-long friendship, both personal and professional. We've had very nurturing conversations that have birthed the idea that we should share our thoughts and our commentary with the outside world. And we were, with the intent of bringing in people to interview and talk to as well. So I think it's a long time coming. It's like an origin story. The second component is that we are compelled to serve something larger than ourselves. And this is a natural fit for, I think, the two of us from different perspectives. We're both American. We're both come from different backgrounds, different regions of the country, different religious communities. I mean, I come from a multi-faith background. And because we have such tremendous trust, we kind of feel like this is the next step. And there's no Christian Muslim podcast. And now we're not saying we're the best at it, but but we are. But we are. I am going to say, it's an innovation, and it's entrepreneurial, and it is something that speaks to something that is close to both of our hearts.
Yeah.
And the third reason is, we have this gift of collaborating and differing and not murdering each other.
That's right.
Or doing something to harm each other, even though we come from two very different camps. And I believe that Muslims should be at the forefront of religious freedom, and Muslims should be at the forefront of engaging with the multi-faith community. And I think that this is a natural step, and hopefully I can bring my brothers and sisters on. And I think on your side, there's a struggle. I always feel like there's a struggle within your community to have a multi-faith voice and collaborate, because a Christian and Muslim will meet up and they'll hang out, and they might talk and they might collaborate on one thing, but there's nothing that's sustaining, and there's nothing that goes the long haul. And hopefully this does. This is our inaugural season. Hopefully we find supporters. Hopefully people like us. So I don't know. Is that a fair assessment with those 3 points?
That's perfect. Fair? I love it.
So what's your take? So is this a cult or what?
Well,
let's just start with that.
Yeah. So I'm concerned about the limitation of scripture reading to just the 4 Gospels and Acts. It's not that those aren't worthy to pay attention to, but when you're cultivating a membership organization and you're placing a specific emphasis, even binding into a separate volume, a very limited selection of scripture, that concerns me. The thing that really I really have problems with. And again, it's a kind of an overlapping Venn diagram with the problem they have enforcing fallout and ramifications for people who've had affairs among their membership, is this notion of the quote wolf king, which basically the theory is that Jesus wants us to go out and influence the people in power, regardless of how nasty a wolf they are, so to speak. And as opposed to a Christ who came to seek and save the lost and the downtrodden and the weak and all that kind of stuff. That I find to be a complete anathema from the biblical text over and over and over again. There's nothing in there. So they're porting in a philosophy and kind of throwing Christ up around it, in my view. Again, if accurately reported by Netflix and Jeff Charlotte. And so that I have a big problem with. And so it not only I've been critical in the past of evangelicals who have embraced Trump and the Trump campaign for the sake of basically an ends justifies the means kinds of ethic, which I too think is beyond the biblical text. But this takes on a whole new spin on appealing to power and seeking to influence power and holding on to power at all costs, setting aside all other ethics and virtues. And I think it's really, really problematic. I think it's unbiblical. And so it looks to me at the core, frankly, like kind of a power cult dressed in Christian clothes.
Okay, so let's play the devil's advocate. So where's so this is an internal dispute, right? So of within Christianity, right? So it's a group of people that have power in Washington who can influence conflict, influence development funding, where it goes, influence events and different communities to do what they want, so that they could to fit their agenda, so that under the auspices that they could influence them negatively, and to what end? It's to maintain power.
Yeah, I mean that's what's kind of unclear. Is just their goal seems to be just get access to power and then have influence over it with no particular agenda necessarily. And you can see where that's really bit them hard on a number of instances, especially when they're playing with foreign dictators and where they get access and they say Jesus and they supposedly orient their conversation around the person of Jesus. And so they kind of get a wink, wink, nod, nod from dictator A, B, or C, and they think they have influence, right? And I think it explains a lot of the embrace of Trump, number one, by evangelical leaders, because if you've been steeped in this wolf king kind of theory of influence, then why wouldn't you embrace Trump? He's the guy with the power. He's the guy with the influence, and his moral credibility and lifestyle need not affect their support of him.
So, are you saying Jesus was obsessed with power?
Definitely not.
So Jesus was obsessed with power, and his whole social revolution was all about seizing power, toppling it, or in this case, influencing it to do stuff. Because my impression of Jesus is this whole deal of a social revolution against power, not necessarily toppling it, but creating like I said, a social revolution that says everyone has access to salvation. Right, that's your whole bag of tricks, right? Yeah. And so, as a Christian, and my whole bag of tricks as a Muslim is, the priesthood of Hazrat Isa is the same deal. We just have this sliver of the crucifixion that we have to figure out, right? But if we overlook that, right, for a moment, it's the same deal. So it's very strange that you have these guys under the auspices of the flag of Jesus creating engagement and disruption of in the halls of power, so that they can seize power under the banner of Jesus to do, again, what? To maintain their own power?
Yeah.
But then you have the question is okay, to what end is the fellowship doing this? So are they, is if there is a Wolf King in the Aryan Brotherhood, are they working with that guy?
Right.
Or are they working, or would they work with Baghdadi because it serves their agenda?
Yeah.
If it serves their, I'm asking questions because I really don't know, but I'll have to ask the
Well,
people that I know in the fellowship. But
like I said, to influence the affairs of government and culture is not, new. It's not an anomaly for Christianity. I mean, my own Baptist faith and message, that is the kind of the primary statement of beliefs by the Southern Baptist Convention, says, quote, "Every Christian should seek to bring industry, government, and society as a whole under the sway of the principles of righteousness, truth, and brotherly love. In order to promote these ends," those are the ends, "Christians should be ready to work with all men of goodwill in any good cause, always being careful to act in the spirit of love without compromising their loyalty to Christ and his truth." Right? So there are caveats. There are even in the Baptist faith and message, right? There are qualifications about our mode of engagement. There's nothing there that would have us set aside our loyalty to Christ and his love for the sake of power.
Well, and that's why
which
you
is
and
temporal,
I have,
and which is what Christ, avoided and declined from Satan and his temptation in the wilderness.
All right, so we're. Like I said, I know I've been invited to the Cedars. Maybe I'm going to be hashtag uninvited now.
Well, you should go before they. You should go before they hear this podcast.
Right. I just feel like what's going on. I was a little bit nervous about going to the Templars. That I was nervous about, because I was like, and when they called me and they said they're in the Basilica and I should come, I'm like, I don't know about that one. I was like, I'll conference call in. Even though the Ismailis and the Templars did collaborate back in the day. So the family, I mean, it is sexy, it is timely, it's a hot topic.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we're the National Prayer Breakfast will come up in January, February, whenever it is, and everybody be scrambling and asking if you're going. It's a sought after sort of position to go in and get invited and see what's going on. And even if you are invited, you have to pay.
Yeah.
So it's $100, for each event, I think it is. So there's the prayer breakfast, then there's a prayer lunch the following day. There's a prayer dinner. So, but the prayer breakfast is the big sort of PR thing.
One of the things in harmony with the Wolf King nonsense, it was really disturbing, was how fascinated, how fixated, at least the founding member and then some of the more recent leadership was with the organization of the Nazis and the mafia. Like, they're in their own words, in their speeches, this undue fascination with the organization and the loyalty structure within National Socialism and the mafia. And I'm like, that's breathtaking as a Christian, that an organization purporting to promote Christianity and Jesus is so fascinated with those models of organization and influence. It's like stunning.
Yeah, I mean,
again, I'm giving a lot of credit to Netflix and Jeff
I mean,
Charlotte.
this is not extraordinary.
I mean, were those just throwaway lines that they're placing undue burdens on, or was that really a core fascination and motivation for these guys? It's just do we not have models in Scripture, like 12 disciples and the 12 tribes, and why the fascination with people who are clearly abusive and preyed on the weak?
Yeah, I don't know. I think your analysis is interesting, because we don't know. I guess we've been interacting with these guys. I've been interacting with these guys for at least the last 10 years, and I know of them. I interact with them, and I kind of treat them like a UFO sighting. I know something's going on, but I can't really tell you what's happening. Honestly, they seem pretty harmless, more or less, at least from my perspective. I mean, I think there's a lot of individuals that get in front of heads of state or influence the U.S. government. Sure. It doesn't matter if it's Trump or Obama or Bush or the other all the regimes that I've been involved in here in the United States. there's a lot of people that are very strange that get appointed or are influencing things. So I mean, to a certain degree, it doesn't necessarily bother me so much. But it is interesting that there's a focus on this, and they do have a power base.
And part of the scandal of the Netflix series, as pointed out by Sophie Gilbert in The Atlantic, is like, how influential are they really? Because like the biggest names that they cited or featured in the documentary were Ensign, Sanford, Siljander, and Wamp. Sanford's the only guy still in office. Ensign was the guy who committed the affair. He's out of the political picture. Siljander served a year in prison,
Right.
And Wamp hasn't been in office for 8 years. So, you know, it does beg the question, like, how much there as far as like the conspiratorial power play.
I mean, I could say on it that the fellowship's meeting with the vice president.
Oh,
I know
sure.
that.
Yeah.
I know that's happening. I mean, I know that they not only have access, but there is a regular meeting schedule. To what end? I mean, I don't know. I mean, I've been in meetings with the executive branch where it sounds like it's really hot and sexy,
Right.
But it's not. We ended up just talking about
Sure,
nothing.
I've been in those.
Yeah, hot and sexy meetings at the executive branch.
Not, to be clear, not hot and sexy meetings. I've been at meetings at the executive branch and behind the security gates that look on paper to be a big deal and aren't really a big deal.
Southern Baptist Conference, hot and sexy meetings of the executive branch. You heard it here.
Especially with the traditional especially with traditional values folks, I can promise they were not hot and sexy.
Yeah, I mean, most of the meetings that you go to are just, you're going, what are we talking about? And if there's no sandwiches, it's downhill. There's
exactly.
no,
if there's no catering.
Yeah, I mean, it's nonsense. But I mean, I know they have access. I know that they're in the meetings, and I know they've got, I'll be honest with you. I think 90% of their whole game is the Cedars, and they have a lot of interesting conversations with people. I'm not sure how much they are projecting power into our government, and then from there, like I said, influencing something that really matters. Now, maybe I'm naive, but I think there's so many competing factions, and there's so many secret societies, and there's so much money being thrown around. I think that it's very difficult for any agenda to become number one. Now, I'm saying that knowing that there's an evangelical council at the White House. I'm saying that knowing that the president is very tight with the evangelical council, and I work with them very closely as well. To my knowledge, none of them are part of the fellowship. Right. The fellowship is a separate faction.
Yeah. That would be my observation too.
Well, I mean, just for listeners, there's three ecosystems in right now in our government. There's the careers.
Yeah.
Then there's the Pence ecosystem, and then there's the Trump ecosystem.
Yeah.
And the Trump ecosystem is the top of the pyramid. Pence ecosystem is right below that, and then you have the foreign the career U.S. government officials that are surrounding and it kind of morphs around the two executive branch ecosystems. Right. So that's really how it's working right now. And I know that Pence has his own crew. He has his own little NSC. He has his own little government set up, and he operates his own little his agenda. And I don't mean that to sound patronizing.
There's definitely there's a different corporate culture between the White House and Vice President's office. That much is pretty clear. Everyone.
Well, and the traditionalists. Yeah, I mean, this is nothing. This is a real change. The traditionalists, the establishment is in the Pence camp, and they are fighting for their survival with the new order around the Trump presidency, and the loyalists to Trump, and so it's like Brownback is from the Pence camp, right? Ambassador Brownback is from the Pence camp,
right?
But you have appointees like like Mnuchin, right? So the Secretary of Treasury, that's from the Trump camp.
Right.
It morphs around, and so I would be the fellowship is in the Pence ecosystem, not in the Trump ecosystem.
Yeah.
And so that I do know, and I do know that the evangelicals in the Trump ecosystem are very, very different than the fellowship guys.
Yes, they are.
Although they do know each other and they do know what's going on there, and the ecosystems collaborate. And respect each other. The collaboration is highly questionable, and
it seems like a lot of the evangelicals in the Trump space seem to be relatively newcomers to the governing thing and the influence thing compared to the evangelicals in the Pence orbit. Would you agree? Like the fellowship folks and the evangelicals in the Pence orbit, they've been around DC a long time, right? There are a lot of people who even have government experience, right? Or they've been in lobby groups, they've been in advocacy, so they've been doing this kind of a long time. And the kind of the core of the evangelical folks that are kind of in the Trump ecosystem, they're relatively newcomers, more or less, to the governing thing, right?
And I think that's a good thing. I'll be honest with you. You can make the fellowship as sinister as you want. Pastor Paula she's not hearing it. So the Trump ecosystem and Pastor Paula and the Evangelical Council is like, hey, you want to know what? You guys are evangelicals, but you're not our guys. So sorry. And so
there are plenty of evangelicals
right there.
And there are plenty of evangelicals who don't think Pastor Paula is evangelical in a theological sense either.
Right.
So there's that dynamic too.
Right. Yeah. So I learned the term Bible thumping. I mean, I knew what the term Bible thumping, I heard of it before, but I learned what it meant, and actually experienced it this year. It was the coolest thing. It was really cool. I was all about it. So, I think that there's, even though as sinister as the fellowship might be portrayed, the reality is they're part of the Pence ecosystem, which is subordinate to the Trump ecosystem and the Evangelical Council, which they're not a part of. So I don't think that I think that their influence is probably, strong with the vice president's office, but they're just one voice and there's many voices probably hitting him. So I'm not sure that the family Netflix series does justice to the environment that is Washington and the Beltway.
Right. Yeah, I agree. This has been Crossing Phase with John Pinna and Matt Hawkins, a podcast of Rolltop Productions. You can continue the conversation with us if you dare on Twitter via @MTHawk, @JTPinna, and @CrossingPhase. Love it or hate it, we'd appreciate your review of our program wherever you glean your favorite podcasts, especially in the iTunes Store. Music for this episode is provided courtesy Vajra. Show notes and an assortment of other information is available at crossingphase.com.